Good evening. What an amazing award ceremony. Let me just say that I'm so proud and honored to be with all of you here today. It's amazing to see all of these cases of digital business transformation. I think on behalf of the 83,000 employees of SAP that are spread over 130 countries around the world, I just want to thank you all again for everything that you do and for advancing the state-of-the-art of digital transformation. I also want to take a moment to thank the India team. Thank you for inviting me to speak on your behalf today. And I was also told that I'm part of the entertainment. So hopefully, I'll be able to inform as well as entertain over the next 20 to 25 minutes or so. The topic is digital transformation or digitization, and it's about how we can look at future-proofing everything around us in that context. So what I will try to speak to today is 4 different perspectives on digital transformation or digitization. The first one is a global perspective. The second one is more of a business perspective, something that we're all familiar with. The third one is, I think, something that was touched upon earlier by a few of us in the audience here, which is what is the impact of digitization on society and the way that we live. And then the final one is a personal perspective. So I'll try to go through each one of these areas and support basically all of this content and information with some of the facts that we are seeing around the world. So to get started, let me just begin with the global perspective. And I wanted to share a study that was done by McKinsey last year on what is actually happening vis-a-vis digitization and globalization. Now, one of the things that's happening is that these two trends are coming together. And so what we see is that whatever we've thought of as globalization, which is if you go back several centuries, you think of globalization as ocean carriers who are moving goods and services across continents. And that trend has been going on for centuries. That is part of the globalization process that continues even today. The second piece of it is more of the exchange of financial instruments across geographic boundaries. And over the last 20 to 30 years, I think supported with the movement of goods, we've also done a really good job in terms of globalization to make it easy for us to transform and transfer these financial instruments. Now, what we are seeing today is that those two big forces of globalization have actually started flattening out, and a third new trend has started. And we've all been participants in this trend, which is the trend of data flows or information flows. Now, one of the things that is unique about this is that these flows are increasing at a rate of 45% year over year. So there's a huge increase in terms of the data flows across multiple continents, across multiple countries, and across the world. One of the things that the McKinsey study also did was they studied what is the impact of these data flows on the increase in GDP on a worldwide basis. And what they found was that the increase of data flows and information flows was basically contributing about $2.8 trillion to the economy on a worldwide basis. Now, you might think that information flows are correlated very strongly with some of the countries in the Western world, but that's actually not the case. The study also found that the data flows actually made the GDPs of emerging markets and some of the other countries that were not participants necessarily in the first part or the second part of globalization, and they were increasing the GDP contribution of those countries by over 50%. So we talk a lot about digital technologies, we talk a lot about digital change. I think it's hugely important to see what is actually happening on a global scale with respect to these types of data flows. And towards the end of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about what businesses need to do in order to start monetizing these data flows and these effects that we're seeing on the global trade, because these data flows are pulling both the traditional trade GDP generation as well as the information, or rather the financial instruments of those data flows. Now, that's a really lofty concept, but I just thought I'd share with you a couple of thoughts where the nature of digitization is actually forcing us to rethink some of our existing assumptions. and actually put into reality some of the things that we only imagined, that were basically out of our imagination, if you will, and in our dreams not so many years ago. So let me share with you a service that is currently being tested in Las Vegas in Nevada in June of this year. This particular service was tested out, and it might become a reality for all of us very soon. It's just to show you that digitization is actually happening, and it's happening much sooner than we actually think. So let's roll that tape.
We have the application designed for EHang 184. After setting up the flight plan with a single click, user can take off on any location, sit, relax, and enjoy the flight. EHang will always keep in mind of its humble beginning, put our heart and soul with the products we build. Absolute safety by design, automation, and sync flight management platform. You have our word.
So this is, again, not just some made-up video. This is an actual service that was tested earlier this year. And the reality of it is that in the next 15 to 20 years, while we are still focused on things like driverless cars, you might actually see in the world a completely different type of transportation. That is self-service. It's based upon the fact that many digital technologies are converging together. So digital is actually arriving a lot faster than you think. There's a recent study, again, done by the World Economic Forum. You can see some of these stats here. My favorite is the last one, which is that there are lots of people who actually believe that by the year 2025, there is a good chance that an AI machine, an artificial intelligence machine, might someday sit on a company's board of directors. Now, I know it sounds like it's completely crazy thinking, but this is where the world is headed today, and a lot of these things that you've heard about and seen about are arriving much faster than we actually think. Another quick look is what your next colleague might look like. So why don't we roll the tape, and I want to show you a little bit of a different view of what we mean by digitization outside of the process or the technology world that we live in. And this is just an example, again, of what is happening in terms of the future work and the type of displacement to work and jobs that is coming. So let's roll that tape really quickly and take a look. This could be your next colleague. So I know this, again, is a very futuristic view of the world, but this is, again, today's reality. And the reason I wanted to share this with you today is the fact that when you think of robotics and you think of AI, you think of real-time information, all of these things are now embedded into the movement of the machine and the intellect of the machine. And so when you look at what is actually happening and what changes might occur in the future, we know that technology, and in particular this type of digitization, is going to fundamentally change the way that we work and the jobs that we actually eventually will have over the next 15 years. What I'm showing on the screen here is where the likelihood of these jobs disappearing is very, very high by the time the next decade comes around, by 2025. So the world has to now confront a lot of disruption in terms of the way that we look at work, jobs. And naturally, I think, as you're seeing in the world today, you're going to see a lot of socioeconomic upheaval in jobs, in terms of the different types of relationships that companies and countries have with each other. So digitization is impacting trade in a big way. It's coming faster than you think, and it's going to create massive socioeconomic upheaval. Now, when you look at digitization from a business perspective, lots of industries were represented in the room today. And I know that many of you who are in particular consumer-facing industries are in the middle of the storm right now. So you are seeing the digital disruption the most. And what I mean by digital disruption is that if you don't rethink the value proposition that you deliver to your end customer, in this case the consumer, you might very soon be in a defensive position, or you might be in a competitive weak position. But other industries are not too far behind in terms of getting into the eye of the storm. So whether you're in life sciences, whether you're in aerospace and defense, in the public sector, all industries eventually will be faced with the digital transformation. When you look at the attitudes of the C-suite executives in India, this was a study that was done by Accenture again this year. Basically what we find is that most people in the C-suite are still equating digitization with SMAC, which is social, mobile, analytics, and cloud technologies. And so those are the lines that you see that are in blue in terms of how many people look at digitization that way. But there are very few people, these are the lines in yellow, that actually look at digitization in the way that it could be perceived, which is it can fundamentally change my business. And so whether it's increasing efficiency or productivity across an existing operation or a supply chain, whether it's completely rethinking business processes for the future, or whether it's coming up with new ways of actually creating end value for the customer. Those are the three things that we think of when it comes to digitization. So I think in terms of the attitudes of the C-suite, we have to be able to look at a shift in the way that we think, that this isn't just about technology, but it's about fundamentally new sources and new ways of creating value. Now, there's one company that actually does this in a really, really good way, and I'm going to just show you the example of this one company that does this in a beautiful way. They're looking at live data across all of their business. They're looking at how they can deliver a live experience to their end consumer, and they're essentially operating a live business model all the time that's always on. And we obviously, we call this live business. So let's take a quick look at the example from Under Armour that is fundamentally rethinking their own business model for the future.
Under Armour has always been more than an apparel company. We've always been an innovation company. Using technology is a critical differentiator, changing the expectation that the consumer will have for what a sports brand should be for them. This is where we're going to need a big, bad technology partner. Bring in, cue the bell, SAP. Under Armour is a live business. We can anticipate the issues and needs that you're going to have using live data to really understand the needs of the athlete, to make better decisions that meet our consumer where they are. The right place with the right product at the right time. The days of the 18-month supply chain are something that we are quickly putting in our rearview mirror, with plans in place right now to cut that by as much as 20 to 30 to 40%. So what SAP really does for the Under Armour brand, it truly allows me to run our business.
So the reason I wanted to share this example with you was that when we look at digital transformation, in particular the way that we think about digital transformation at SAP, it really involves all aspects of your business. It's not just one aspect of your business. So whether it's your execution of your supply chain with your suppliers and partners, whether it's improving your customer experience, whether it's engaging your workforce and your people, or whether it's making use of data and your assets. It's all of the above put together, and you can all obviously decide, depending upon which industry you're in, you can start at one of those endpoints, but at the end of the day, all of these endpoints ultimately have to be connected end to end. And in order for us to do that in a good way, what you need is a stable core. And so I'm sure you've seen this from SAP in the past, but the idea of a renewed digital core supported by all of the other edge pieces that help you manage your customers, your assets, and your workforce and your suppliers, that's the end-to-end portfolio that SAP delivers for you. The third piece that I wanted to talk about was just the impact on society. And I know that this is a little bit of an eye chart, but this was a study that came out actually this week from The Economist. And given what's happening in the world today in terms of the attitudes towards the flows of people, in particular immigration, this was a very useful chart. I'll try to explain it for those of you who cannot see it at the back. The axis on the y-axis is basically measuring what is the favorability rating of globalization in that particular country. The x-axis is measuring the impact of globalization on GDP. And one of the fascinating findings in here is that if you look at the top right column, you will see that in India, we have a much more positive perception of globalization, in fact, amongst the highest in the world. And the reason for that is that globalization is actually increasing per capita GDP at a very, very high rate. So the attitude that we have within for globalization within India is very, very strong. Now, of course, you could, the size of the bubbles talk about what is the percentage of foreign-born people in this country. You'll see a big difference between what you have in India and, for instance, what you have in the United States. But that's a separate topic. I think the key here is that given the attitudes of India towards globalization, given the contribution of globalization to our GDP, I think what we have to do in terms of Indian businesses today is to figure out how we can start monetizing this increase in data flows that we looked at in the very first slide, right? So the next few business models of the future really have to be predicated not on moving people around or objects around or goods around, but really think about how do you move information and data around. The other close comparison is with how we're doing vis-a-vis other countries in terms of our internal infrastructure. Again, this is a chart from The Economist. It'll be hard to read, but I'll try to get to the finer points of this one. So if you look at the connectedness scale, which is the degree of inter-territorial connectivity, India ranks really, really low compared to other countries in the world. And part of that is just an infrastructure and a systemic issue. However, India has the largest potential, even higher than China, in terms of economic potential in the future over the next 10 years. And I think the biggest thing that is driving this potential is not just the fact that we have 800 million consumers, but the fact that there are close to 50% of the people in India are below 30 years old. So we have a fundamentally younger population that can basically develop a lot of skills in technology and can fundamentally leapfrog many of these other countries that you see in the chart. So we have huge opportunities in terms of where we can go in the future. We all know the dream of the digital India, the broadband, the promise of broadband highways, the mobile access to every citizen, a national information architecture. I know that many of you in your businesses and SAP is pulling all of these things together and supporting these causes as well. I think one of the biggest things that we have to remind ourselves that this is transformation on a scale that is perhaps unmatched in human history. So it's a very, very big effort. And I think the idea of this transformation actually touching the lives and improving the lives of millions, if not billions of people worldwide is not a very far-fetched one. From a personal perspective, just to try to close on a couple of notes from a personal perspective. I think earlier we shared with you sort of the 4 ingredients in terms of digital success. I think, Deep, you had that slide put together, which were vision, knowledge, skills, and then technology. What we know is that close to 3/4 of the companies that are in the S&P 500 today will likely not be in the S&P 500 in the next 10 years. So there's a huge amount of disruption that's going on in the global scale, right? We also know that very few executives are actually prepared for the type of scale and the changes that they want to drive in their business. We know that jobs are going to be replaced. You have to think about fundamentally new roles for your organizations in the future. And once you've done all of those things, which is you have the vision, you have the knowledge, you have the skills, and you have the technology, that's when you can actually pull all of these things together. Technology, again, is not at the leading edge of this transformation. It comes after you've done the visioning, you have acquired the knowledge, you've acquired the skills, and now you can put your technology to work. So in closing, I'll say a couple of things, which is you, every one of you here, representing your businesses, you are in the center of this arena. And in closing, I'll just leave everybody with a very famous quote from Theodore Roosevelt, who said that the credit ultimately belongs to the person who is in the arena. That is you. You're doing all of the work, right? And I'm sure as you go through, and I think there was a question that was asked earlier about, what were some of the challenges, what were some of the issues that you've had? I'm sure every one of you is going to go through those changes. But you've got the knowledge, you've got the vision, you've got the skills, and with SAP, you have the technology. So let's make it happen. Okay? With that, thank you very much.